Now, the beauty of life is oftentimes you do get second chances, don't you? And there's actually some Gamer Subs flavours that after giving a second chance to, I actually do kind of like, even though maybe I didn't vibe with it initially straight on. Like one I'd have to say that I've sort of gotten into recently is when I first got the Browser Brew one, which is the one by Opera GX, where it's like a black currant flavour. At first I was actually like, yeah, this is all right, but you know, like I'm going to stick with my favourites mainly. But actually over time, I find that's one of the ones I do mix into my rotation every now and then. It's very pleasant. It really hits the spot if you like blackcurrant flavours. If you had something like Ribena when you were a kid, obviously you can get 10% off everything from Gamersubs on their website using my code Thorin at gamersubs.gg. That includes things like the AFK blend, which is a special one formulated to help and promote going to sleep, so it's a good offset to your other caffeine usage. An interesting detail I looked up recently, because over the last few years, we've had a pivot in the formats in League of Legends tournaments to double elimination playoffs. And I'm a big fan of that. I've always thought the best format in the history of esports is the one at the international. They've actually somewhat ruined that player over the last few years. But the one from the prime time of we're thinking like 2014 sort of era up to like, let's say like 2020 or something, maybe around that period, where you have the group stages and then it's mainly not many teams eliminated, but then you go into a big double elim bracket. And famously, that's actually the format that most people seem to vibe with. If you don't know, that's actually very similar to the iconic IPL 5 that everyone loves just before the LCS era in late 2012, the one that Fnatic came second at and World Elite won. So I think most people enjoy this format. It's basically the format of MSI now, isn't it, from 2023 onwards? But most crucially, it's even the format of the LCK. From 2023 onwards, the LCK went from being a famously single elimination tournament. In fact, in the LCK era, they didn't even just do one big bracket. They did a bracket, but it was a gauntlet style, wasn't it? Where your placing in the league bumped you up different places along. And then after that, they had a couple of years in the early 2020s where they did that format where it was like a single bracket, but then the placing made you like skip around and wait for the first two matches. And you picked which one of those two winners in the round of 6 you wanted in the semi-finals. And the most interesting thing is, then we went to this double elim format, and then obviously MSI's had it as well. It's only Worlds doesn't have this format, and EWC if you count that. Now, the reason why this is relevant is because T1 has been one of the best teams, an elite team for the majority of that almost 3-year time period. Faker, I don't think has been the best player of that time, but you know what? He's won PC Player of the Year, he's won LCK Player of the Year, he's won all these Worlds Championships and awards. But did you know that T1, the organisation in League of Legends, and Faker, the player, in the LCK and in the MSI, in the real big tournaments, they have never won a single double elimination tournament? Now, you might think to yourself, as I just sort of set up there, but wait a minute, there haven't been that many, have they? Well, let's just set the table again. T1 is the most successful League of Legends org ever. Faker is the most successful decorated League of Legends player ever. Collectively, they won 5 World Championships, 2 MSIs, 10 LCKs, unbelievable. But they've never won a double elimination tournament. And yeah, until 2 or 3 years ago, 3 basically, there wasn't any. Just been the odd weird one in some other form. Now there are tons though. In fact, the majority of tournaments now are double elimination. And crucially, as I'll show you, not only does T1 and Faker not win these double elim tournaments, but when you find out who does, it'll put a very interesting framing on who is the best and who are the best teams. Because actually, it almost becomes a bit like in tennis, where certain people are good on one court and with one style of play, and other people have a different style of play and are better on a different surface. So let's dive into it. There have been 9 tournaments that Faker has played in that were double elimination, and he didn't win a single one. And on average, he'd still be making like the final basically, but just not winning them. So if we go, the first time LCK switched to a double elim playoffs was obviously Spring. If people don't remember, T1 came in at number 1. That's when they had an awesome run. They were number 1. They came in. Obviously, they got to select the team they wanted, so they've selected KT, because at the time, Handball Life was pretty good and started to cook when they'd already gotten Viper in. Admittedly, the lineup was a bit different from the one you see now. So T1 got them. They had that 3-2 there. They won that match. They beat Gen.G in the upper bracket. So it looked like they were going to win their first double elim tournament. They didn't though, because Gen.G came back. Remember Gen.G with the different roster with Ruler, the previous split had won their first split together with Chovy, etc. And they went back to back. They won from the lower bracket. They won out against KT and then they won out against T1 3-1 in the final. So you had that one. Then you had MSI. This was the first year where MSI used double elimination. Obviously, because of that, Gen.G's coming as the number one team. But at the time, JDG ended up being amazing. It was that insane roster with Ruler. But no one knows, like, can the LPL actually match up with the LCK? So you think, actually, it's an international tournament. Chovy's never won one of those. Good chance for T1 to nick it, maybe, right? Remember, they'd been in the finals of last year's MSI when it was the weird online one from people playing from China in Korea, and then Worlds obviously is classically single elim, and they were second place to DRX there. So internationally, they should be a globe team, right? Obviously, they have the awesome game. This is one of the best games of all time, by the way. T1 against JDG, the upper bracket final. But then the lower bracket, they famously got beaten by the Yagao era of BLG, 3-1, and then it was actually an all LPL final that was won by JDG. Then back in LCK summer, this was one where famously KT was the first place team, remember? And Gen.G was second. I think they lost like one series and then Gen.G lost two or something. T1 was actually far behind. They were down in fifth. Because this was the summer, obviously, where Faker had to leave the lineup. Porby came in. He had his hand injury. The team played shit with Porby. They didn't even play enough matches for Faker to even have a chance to be All-Pro, but he wouldn't have been anyway. They were looking in really bad form. Famously, KT picked T1 after T1 beat D+. And then epically got upset, even though BDD played great. Unfortunately, the rest of them collapsed. People like Keen, people like Gaming didn't do well. T1 won that one. In the upper bracket final, Gen.G clutched them out 3-2. In the lower bracket, they again beat KT 3-2 for the Nightmare Fuel for your KT fan. And then in the final, Gen.G just clapped them 3-0. Then, obviously, T1 went on, won EWC just around that time. And no, wait, they won EWC next year. It's Worlds after that. They won Worlds after this, obviously, as a single in one where they beat JDG. It's one where they beat LNG with Scout, then they beat JDG with Knight in the semis, and then in the final, they beat the bizarre Weibo Gaming was there with Zhao and Deshai, inexplicably. You would have thought that would be BLG or Gen.G from that side. So then we come to the next year, and obviously you will know Gen.G was on their run where they won a bunch of titles in a row. So yes, unsurprisingly, they won this one. They were winning the 4 titles in a row. They came in as number 1, but T1 was number 2. So this time T1 doesn't get selection. Gen.G gets selection, so they pick DK, which means that Hanwha Life, who were the third best team, goes over and plays T1. Hanwha Life 3-0 clapped them. This is one where Viper was godlike, if you remember. In the low bracket, T1 took player down 1. Since Gen.G at the time had a better matchup with Hanwha Life, it was Hanwha Life against T1 in the low bracket. T1 clutched it out. They got to the final. Actually, Faker played pretty well in this final. There were some epic games. Obviously, Chovy was just even better. And that was the epic 3-2 that had mega viewership and had that insane game 5 with the Azir play by Chovy. Didn't win this one. Then he went to MSI again. I mean, you should already know this is the one won by Gen.G where Lehens was the MVP. And this is where, but still, T1 came in as the second Korean team. At the time, remember, this is not when there's a JDG. This is when Knight's gone to BLG. So you could actually argue LPL should be weaker. So I actually think people did think T1 and Gen.G were the two teams competing just like this year. So you go here and they narrowly beat G2 in that series where famously it felt like G2 could have beaten them. They got beaten by BLG convincingly. In the lower bracket, they beat TL, even though TL actually played really well against them. They beat T1 3-0, even though that's probably one of the most close 3-0s you'll ever see, where G2 again was in the game the whole time. BLG clutched them out 3-2 in the lower bracket, and then it was Gen.G against BLG in the final, and it was won by Gen.G and Chovy. Back in summer, this is the one where Hanwha Life shocked Gen.G, who were on their perfect season, if you remember. And this is the one where you had T1 came in as the 4th seed. People will forget this one because, again, it was summer. This is where they fucked up in summer and they were looking sketchy. But they won EWC, so gave some people hopium that they were going to be good still. So this is the one where they have to play KT in the opening round, and then Gen.G actually doesn't pick T1 for obvious reasons. They just have a clutch factor against some of those players historically, so they pick D+. Hanwha Life claps T1, goes down, they beat D+. Hanwha Life claps them again and makes them third place, so you never even get them in the final. Then you come to this year, we have the LCK Cup. The LCK Cup, obviously, T1 was doing awesome. Them and D+ were the two best teams at this phase of the tournament. Then you go here, they easily got in to the playoff thing, but the bizarre thing is, because of this weird format, they actually had to play through this bullshit where they had to go into this match here instead of just being straight in here, which I do think is a nonsense format. And they actually got beaten by Hanwha Life 3-2 because Hanwha Life got better as the sort of playoff playing part went on. And then Hanwha Life obviously did a million epic game fives all the way to the championship. So they actually lost only in the playoffs to the team that won the tournament, but that made them come 5th to 6th. And then Gen.G was second and could have won by 1 game. Then you go to MSI this year. At MSI, obviously first stand wasn't a double elim and T1 wasn't there. At MSI, they came in as, I do think on paper, the second best team. I think you had to say Gen.G was the best. They looked awesome in Korea. They weren't losing. I do think T1 looked really good as well against them. And obviously they're one of the few teams that had the chance to beat them and could play really well. Most of the players in T1 were playing well, actually. By the time that we got to the end of this split, and then Hanwha Life actually fell off to the end of this part of this split or whatever before you got to this road to MSI. Now, if you go down to here, they narrowly beat CF4. They beat BLG quite easily. This is the one where Beishwan was playing. They narrowly lost to Gen.G, a pretty epic game, one of the series of the year. They beat Anyone's Legend in a really great game, and then they had also another cool game against Gen.G. I think actually the upper bracket was better, but this was an also cool 5-gamer. They came second there. Last one is right now. Well, obviously, over the weekend, they got eliminated in 4th place, didn't they? And they're a playing team for Worlds, so they'll play the 4th place team from the LPL. Let's hope it's Rookie. Could even be like Zhao, believe it or not. Could even be Pays. Who knows? So I think it will be Rookie. So we might have Rookie versus Faker for the for the last spot in the main event of Worlds, which would be pretty hype. So coming into this one, you had, they were in 3rd because Hanwha Life and them had a tie in terms of series, even though T1 had the head-to-head, but Hanwha Life won more games. So you ended up with T1 having to go back here, which luckily meant, by the way, they were never going to get picked by Gen.G, were they? So they beat D+ in what was a way closer series than it should have been. T1's a much better team. Just some weird drafting choices there. D+ actually sort of drained Faker's pool. Then you had Gen.G obviously picked KT, but little did we know KT was actually powering up at this point, and KT shockingly upset Gen.G. Then again, T1 themselves got upset by the Hanwha Life. They were owning in the regular season and got 3-0 clapped. And across the board beaten. They beat D+ in the lower. Then they had this epic game we just all saw against Gen.G on Sunday at the same time as the LPL finals, unfortunately, because who knew the 4th place game would be so epic in LCK. It was a 5-gamer, but again, just as they have for most of the year, and not even just against T1, Gen.G pulls out the game 5. They've been fucking epic at that. So that means T1 finishes 4th in the overall season playoffs for LCK, because there's only one title. They don't even count LCK Cup, apparently. They think that's almost like a pre-season tournament in Korea. They're just a weird bunch over there. So, by the way, I think as a result, this LCK title should count for twice as much as a normal split, because in the past we only had the 2 splits, just like in Europe when you had that weird format with 3 mini splits and 1 season finals. That can't really be 4 LEC titles, can it? Like, we used to have 2 before, so you got to sort of like scale them and pro-rata them for my money. So anyway, there's all the 9 tournaments. So kind of shocking, right? When you put them in double elim, T1 isn't the best team, even if on the rare occasion they come in as number 1 and number 2 seed. They just don't get it done. Now, what conclusions can we draw from this? Look, I wouldn't go crazy on the conclusions, but I think there's some obvious sort of big picture things you can consider. Because what were the 3 tournaments they won over that like almost 3 years? They won Worlds twice, single elim tournament, and they won EWC once, assuming we're counting that in 2024. All single elim tournaments, all 8-team playoffs, no double elim component. Now, the reason why this is significant to me is, if you'd asked me before I looked into this, will T1 have won many of the double elim tournaments? The obvious answer is no, because aside from maybe Spring Split of 2023, they were never the best team and Faker was never the best player. So why would a team that isn't the best team or the best player win a double elim tournament? Double elim absolutely emphasizes the better team because you get a second chance. You get more chance to potentially figure out the meta by watching other teams play. And if you go through the upper bracket, they play and you don't, sometimes extra matches. And then you can have rematches. So you can be beaten by someone the first time you play them. Then you can figure out what you need from that game to adjust your draft or your playing style and beat them the second time. That's why I think it's harder. Here's what's weird. It's maybe more intense to win a single elim tournament because you can't ever fail. But because you can fail once, depending on if you make the final from the upper bracket, I do think it makes it harder overall to win double elim tournaments. So crucially to me, is T1 the most clutch team in league over those years? Yeah, I think that's a totally fair comment. I think it'd be up there. I think after that, you'd maybe put Gen.G or you'd maybe put this year's Gen.G. But I think T1 should win that one. I think they'd probably be the most clutch team because as an underdog, as the not as good team, as the team at Worlds, they've sort of been able to pull out the thing. And in fact, they used to be the masters sometimes of the Game 5. But I do think that because they're clutching it and they're not actually the better team and they're doing things like working off limited meta and people haven't figured out yet what to do because they're picking their own picks, not what's strong in the meta, I think it makes it more likely they win when it's single elim and when there's fewer games, when you win with 3 BO5s, when you don't have to have a rematch, when someone else can't play you or play someone else and figure something out in the lower bracket, when there's not more matches to watch, etc., etc. It seems like the smaller the sample size, the more likely T1 wins. The larger the sample size, the less likely they win, as shown by the results. Then contrast this with Chovy. So over the same time period, guys, in 9 tournaments, all the ones that Faker was playing in I've included, in 8 of those 9 tournaments, Chovy and Gen.G placed higher than T1. In 7 of those 9, they were in the final. And in 5 of those 9, they were the champions. And 1 of those 9 hasn't completed yet. They could still make the final. They could still win this LCK season. So that could even be 8 finals. And it could even be 6 championships. So 2/3 of the time, it could be that Chovy and Gen.G win if it's a double elim tournament. Obviously, they won an MSI. They've won a bunch of the LCKs, etc. There's even another contrast. If you want to know, in Dota 2, one of the all-time clutch cores was PPD's Evil Geniuses team. At times they had Sumail, at times they had Arteezy, they had Awi, they had Fair, they had all sorts of different players, Universe, you all know them, Zai. When they had these different, famously, most of the tournaments they won, again, like 75-80%, were from the lower bracket. Exactly for those reasons. They'd figure out the draft better. They'd try experimental stuff in the upper bracket. They'd lose an upper bracket game where someone clapped them, and then they'd come back and clutch it out in the lower bracket where it was the epic close games, etc. So I do think it's not as simple as this team's clutch, this team isn't. It also depends what the format is, what it rewards. And that's actually why, by the way, in the circuit, I would like both to exist. I would like there to be some tournaments that are single elim. I would like there to be some tournaments that are double elim. I think they promote and emphasize different strengths and weaknesses in teams and players. But notice how differently we might think about these players and teams' careers if all of League had been double elim or if all of League was single elim.
This is LS, and you're on Thorin's YouTube channel, so cut the Western shit.
I don't forget the people that support me, and in the case of this video, that would be Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Jasun, Jensen Goh, Nicky, Tosh, Thooorin, and you know who I'm always going to give the biggest shout out to, my boy Jerky's Minion. Do you want to ask a question for my video AMA? Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you want to find out who the next guest is on one of my interviews that I've already recorded but not yet released. Or maybe you want to take part in one of those fabled long-form discussions where you get to decide the topics. Well, if any of those perks or others tickle your fancy, simply click on the Patreon link in the description box below and put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrolluminati today.